Welcome to our Rai Film and Study Collection. It's wonderful to have you here. I'd like to have a little conversation with you about your association with Satyajit Ray. When did you first meet him?
I was aware of his work from the very first time he came on the scene with Pather Panchali. And that was way back now, almost 50
years.
50 years. Because I was a part of my college, I was the captain of my state and university team in swimming.
Swimming?
Yes, so I was a 1500-meter freestyle swimmer, and the national championships were taking place in Calcutta. And when I went there, an uncle of mine, who was a commercial artist, he knew of my passion for films. So he said, "Have you heard of a film called Pather Panchali? It's running in town. Go see it."
Oh.
So that's how it started, and that was the first release of Pather Panchali in Calcutta. So I went to see it after my training session in the evening.
Without any subtitles?
Without subtitles. And I don't know any Bengali. But I found it so compelling. It was like an explosion in my head. Because, I had ambitions to be a filmmaker, and suddenly I felt that, there was a way out of, because I didn't want to make films like they made in the conventionally. So, and that was something, so I followed it up by seeing that film a dozen times on that very visit to Calcutta. So
Dozen times? Dozen times?
A dozen times. 12 times. I used to see it twice a day, every day. The first show and the last show of the day. I was so taken by this film, and I would discuss it with anybody and everybody. And when I went back to Hyderabad, I started a film society in my college. In fact, I had started it a little earlier. And then I wrote to Mr. Ray, and I wrote him a letter saying that I would like to show his film, by which time, of course, he had already made his second film, which was Parush Pathar. And I said, I would like to show whatever film you make, I would like to have a screening of it for my film society. So we got it, and he was very prompt in his response, and he put me in touch with his producers. And so with Aurora and various other people, as long as I was in Hyderabad, I left Hyderabad in 1959, so for those 3 years, whatever he made, we showed at our film society in Hyderabad. And but then I would never miss any of his work. But I really wanted to meet him, and that only became possible when Gopa Ghoshal was a niece of Ray's.
Right.
When I met her, she used to be in Bombay frequently. And she said that she would introduce me to him, and which she did. I met him on the sets of Nayak on the last day of the shooting of the film. And then, of course, I thought it would be a very brief sort of thing because, I didn't want to bother him, and that was the last day of his shooting. But he seemed to have all the time in the world. Amazing, being normally filmmakers and in such a rush. And he said, why don't you come over in the evening to my place after I wrapped up here and come. So I said, fine, and I went to meet him. And when I met him, of course, he didn't offer me dinner, but we had a very long discussion. No, he went on, every question I might have had, I asked him, he answered, and what was wonderful was that he wasn't talking down to me. And we chatted for a long time. I was making documentaries at that time, and then he asked me what the scene was in Bombay, etc., etc. And when I left his house, it was about 11 at night.
Oh.
And so I went back, and then, from then on, whenever he was in Bombay or when I was in Calcutta, I would go and visit him. And this carried on, and when I made my first feature film, of course, when I made my other documentaries too, I would often ask him to come and see the films if he had the time. And he did see several of my documentaries that I had made. And some of them he liked, and then he recommended. On his own, he recommended my name for the Homi Bhabha Fellowship.
Ah.
You know, so in 1971. So, and this was when I was just planning to make Ankur. And I just then found the producer for it. But I said it would allow me to break away from my advertising profession. So I took the fellowship and came here to America for 2 years. And I went back, made my film. And it was due to him that I got the Homi Bhabha Fellowship. And then when I went back and I made the film, Ankur, he was my first audience. He was totally struck by Shabana's performance, which he also wrote about in his book.
Right. And then he would cast Shabana in Shatranj Ke Khiladi.
Yeah, subsequently he would do that.
नींबू सुपारी संग कौन जाने शतरंज में कौन जादू है
But he was really struck by her. And then, of course, we had this discussion in which he said, why do you work with quality? I have asked Mr. Ray, I want to first find out from you whether you would like to make a film on Satyajit Ray. I said, I've been wanting to make a film on Satyajit Ray for a long time. I don't have the means to do it. So he said, I'll give you an opportunity now. I get Films Division to sponsor a film on Ray. Would you want to make it? I said, yes. And then Mr. Dutt told me, he said, you know, I've asked Ray, who would he prefer to make a film on Ray? And Ray said, nobody from Bengal. And so that's how, you know.
But Benegal.
Yeah, Benegal.
But what about pacing? For instance, if you don't write a detailed script or even a treatment, how would you get an indication of how you're going to pace it?
Well, if you have it fairly clearly in your head, I suppose that's enough. You shoot according to what is in your head rather than what's on paper.
Yes.
Because the unit, the crew members get to know what the story, how the story goes, etc. But at that point, since we were shooting maybe only 4 or 5 days a month, sometimes not even that. There was a 6-month gap when there was no shooting and no money. So that was all right.
Yes.
There was no sort of compulsion to write a script because we had all the time in the world to shoot the film. In fact, we learned filmmaking through the process of making Patha Patali. We knew nothing. Most of us knew. And in fact, the editor was also comparatively new. He'd probably cut only one film before that. And in the final cut, at the time of final cutting, we were rushed. There's no question. So we might have done unorthodox things without realizing it. That's it, because the final cut was done over a period of 10 days and 10 nights.
So when he said that, I was absolutely chuffed. I said, wow, you know, Ray thinks I'm right to make a film on him. So I went ahead and started to make a film on him, which was meant to be a 20-minute picture. And of course, it went on and on.
It's interesting that he would say that nobody from Bengal should do a documentary on me. On the other hand, after the Murray Seaton biography, when Andrew Robinson approached him, his comment to him was, I have decided my next biographer has to know Bengali.
Right. Right. Clearly, that I can understand. But you see, there was also a certain kind of, I think what used to happen, what was bugging him at that time, because it was a phase, what was bugging him at the time was that there was not a single filmmaker in Bengal who had a nice thing to say about him. You know, there was a phase like
Right.
that. And
Especially in the 70s.
yeah, so there were
he was under so much
constant
fire.
attack,
Yeah.
constant attack, and that was the problem. So that's one of the reasons, I think, because and he never used to pay too much attention to the reviews that used to come out on his films during that period. Later on, of course, he did revise his judgment, and then, of course, he was very good friends with all the people who were very critical of him, and later on became actually almost his acolytes. So like Mrinal Sen, for instance, you know, who was for a long time a very, very strong critic of his, but later on became not only sympathetic, but almost became an acolyte of Ray's. So that was a very interesting period, even for him. But then, you know, he was towering over everybody else as a filmmaker. So that was one of the situations. I think it was really quite lonely at the top for him.
Some critics of his life and work say that he was such a towering genius, but he never really encouraged anybody to be a good filmmaker like he was. Is that true?
No, that was not my experience. I can tell you that. It was not my experience, and I don't think it was the experience of a lot of people who worked with him. You know, he used to have assistants. He used to take assistants. There were some chaps from Bombay who went there. But if they didn't make it, it was not because he didn't give them the right opportunities. The opportunities were always there with him. But you see, one of the things about him was he was, I think as a filmmaker, he knew every single thing that he wanted to do in a film. So in that sense, it was very difficult to get an in into him, you know, like to discuss. So when he's making a film, let's just say you have an assistant working for you. Now, assistants normally would like to discuss and also maybe suggest alternatives, different kinds of things, and so on and so forth. But if you're completely convinced of what you're doing, you're not likely to or wish to discuss the matter any further, you know. So that opening was never necessarily possible with Ray.
তুমি যে ঘরে কে তা জানতো তুমি যে ঘরে কে তা জানতো এ যে বিনা মেঘে পড়ে বাজ এ যে বিনা মেঘে পড়ে বাজ বিনা মেঘে পড়ে বাজ বিনা মেঘে পড়ে গেছে কেষ্ট যথেষ্ট যথেষ্ট
As I watch his films time and time again, I discover so many little things that I didn't notice in the previous viewing of the film. And his making was extremely complex.
His detailing was so unbelievable.
Right.
And what is more than the detailing of his films, the grammar, you know, the use of cinematic grammar was so sophisticated, you know, so extraordinarily well thought out and well worked out. You know, like this little film too that I just saw. There's so many things in it that I would, if I'm watching that, I said, how did he suddenly think of doing something like this? You know, quite unexpected in the manner in which he would choose to shoot images and put them together. Now that quality that he had, this wonderful way, and the economy with which he used cinema language, as it were, you know, was absolutely impeccable. Now that was one of the great things about his work. Because I'm never tired. I never tire of seeing his work. You know, after all, if you look at many of his contemporaries, when you go back to some of their early work, you suddenly feel that they're dated. But with Ray, they don't seem to be dated at all. This is the point. And you know, he's contemporary because his language, cinematic language use, was not topical. You know, he was using something that in many ways was like how great writers use language, you know. That sort of thing about Ray. That's why I think that's a remarkable part of it. Like even to this day, you look at Pather Panchali. I've seen it over 35 times in my, in these many years. I go back to that film and I see it. It has the same emotional strength that it had the first time I saw the film.
Satyajit Ray made some 37 feature films, documentaries, and shorts. He said he attempts to capture both what is unique to Bengal and that which is universal.
To you, my noble son.
Now that's something quite rare in a filmmaker, because filmmakers are usually tied too much to the time at which they made the film, you know.
Each film he made is sort of unique in a way, very different from the others. Now, how do you think he influenced your work?
Well, he influenced my work in the way that I think in many ways, by looking at his films, I learned to think for myself. You know, I did not necessarily need to refer back to a filmmaker, because suddenly it struck me that whatever influences I had, they had to get internalized. If they were not fully internalized, I would merely be mimicking them.
Right.
You know, mimicking stealing phrases, as it were, from other filmmakers, which I didn't want to do. And in that sense, he was a living example of that. You know, Ray was a living example of that, because all his influences are fully internalized. And that's what I learned from him.
You know, in almost all his films, there are no real villains. All the characters in not black and white, they're in different shades of gray. Has that influenced you?
But I never saw the world as black and white, to start off with. That is what my criticism of Bombay cinema actually was. The fact that we tended to do black and white things, we tended to only tell parables, there were only moral fables, they never got beyond that position. And we never really created full-fledged human beings. So I felt the same, even before I saw Ray's films. But the point about it was that it became absolutely, I became convinced of all this when I saw his work. And I also learned another thing from him. You make your own way, you know. See, that's where you don't really need to look to anybody else. You have to make your own way. You know, cut your own path. You don't sort of look at other people and say, this is how he went, that is how he went. Not at all. Because you see, Ray did the same. You know, that's what I learned from him. Because he didn't follow anybody at all. You know, yes, he did have incredible influences because he also, I think, like Renoir or the neorealists and so on and so forth, he did look at all those films. But the fact is that he didn't follow any of them.
He was his own person.
He was his own person.
Here we try to preserve and promote Satyajit Ray in an academic educational environment. We have come a long way. Could we invite you to be on our advisory board?
Sure, I could be on your advisory board. I don't think there's a problem there.
Do you have any advice for us?
I don't have any advice for you because I have a feeling that you're doing a splendid job. I don't think there's another Ray archive that is as elaborate and as near, as much as, and you've been doing it under very difficult circumstances. But I guess I would like to try and help you obtain more of his work if that is possible for me to do. Because let me see, because there are films that Films Division he made for Films Division, the films that he made for NFDC. Those things at least you should be able to obtain, I guess, for your archive, because those also need to be preserved.
Right.
Because some of them are quite exceptional films.